So, welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. I have Dheena. Dheena, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to have this discussion today.
Man, I'm very excited to have you.
Thank you.
So thanks for taking the time out to join us. So, on the podcast, we discuss individuals' experience navigating the American education system. So, whether you yourself were an immigrant or your parents were immigrants, we just talk about, what was that experience like going through the K through 12 system. Then also we talk about how you decided on what you wanted to do for a career as you're in high school and you're thinking about what does life after high school look like. So we want to hear your story, so just tell
Sure.
us, who is Dheena, how you came to be. So if you want to just, just tell us what was your experience like just starting off early, going through the K through 12 system with parents who were immigrants.
Yeah, so my parents are immigrants of the beautiful country of Panama. It's a small but mighty country in Central America,
Hey.
connecting Costa Rica and Colombia. So we're right in the center of that.
Hmm.
My parents came to the US around the 70s, 80s from Panama. So
Hmm.
I am first generation born in the United States from my parents. And initially, I think most immigrants, they were looking for a better opportunity, coming from Panama, to the US, and everybody saw the Big Apple as the place to be. So they started in New York City and Brooklyn,
Hmm.
namely, and then throughout life, they made their way to Florida. And my father actually went back to Panama. So rewinding, I think when I think about like how I was introduced into this world, and I was born in America in the 80s,
Hmm.
and I believe that my parents had an idea what they wanted to instill from a educational standpoint, but there was no plan laid out. It was like
Mm.
study and go to school,
Right.
right?
Sounds
So
familiar.
from yeah, man, it so from K to 12, for me personally, I just felt like go to school was the thing that was ingrained in my mind. And
Hmm.
to be honest, I was a great student from the time that I was like in kindergarten through, I would say, elementary school.
Hmm.
And then started off in New York in, like pre-K, kindergarten. Then we moved to Florida, and then I was in elementary school there, moved back to New York, and I was in high school in New York, and then
Hmm.
back to Miami, and I was high school in Miami. So I
Hmm.
was bounced around quite a bit,
Hmm. Hmm.
which sometimes I resented it, and today I can appreciate it because, from a career standpoint, it allows me to connect with people more broadly, right?
Hmm.
And we can
Hmm.
get into that a little later.
For sure.
But I will be honest in that when I got to middle school, high school, I wanted to be the cool kid.
Hmm.
I went
Hmm.
through a very awkward stage in adolescence and puberty and all the things.
Hmm.
Was the tallest. I mean, it's amazing because I'm 5'3" now, so I'm short, but I
Wow.
had a growth spurt
Yeah.
and I was
Early.
probably this height when I was in fifth grade,
Right.
right? So I just blossomed really fast. I was awkward and I was very insecure. So I wanted to fit in. So
Hmm.
from middle school to high school, I wanted to be that cool kid and I wasn't doing well in school. I was like
Mm.
a B to C student,
Hmm.
whereas before that, I was like honor roll, straight A,
Hmm.
student. So a lot of the socioeconomic pieces of how you transcend from being an immigrant child to an American born child really disrupted, I think, how I
Hmm.
was matriculating,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And when it came time to go to college, there was an expectation. I was already working, so I was working retail. I worked at Foot Locker and all
Hmm.
the cool
Hmm.
places. So it was an understanding that I would go to more school, but there was,
Hmm.
like I said earlier, no plan for me, right?
Hmm.
So my parents, they didn't take out loans. I took out loans, and thankfully, I had a best friend, and she's still my very dear friend to this day. She's American, African American, and her mother actually
Hmm.
went to Howard,
Hmm.
and she was a Delta. So she was a part of the Divine Nine.
Hmm.
And then in high school in Miami, I had a librarian and English teacher who was a Black woman, an AKA member of
Hmm.
Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And there is when I started to understand some of like the options for college and
Mm-hmm.
more specifically HBCUs, historically
Mm-hmm.
Black colleges and universities. So then
Okay.
my interest started to peak there, and then I
Yeah.
started to explore.
So a couple of things I was able to glean from that. So you're pretty much on the East Coast, right? So you're
Hmm.
going from New York to Florida to Miami,
Yep.
and you're pretty much
Hmm.
going into communities where they're pretty international, right? So you
Yep.
so I would say that that's somewhat seamless. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like if you're going from New York to Miami, you're kind of I'm assuming you're comfortable culturally, right? Because
Yes. Very comfortable.
it's not like moving to North Dakota from Brooklyn, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So here's a question for you. So with your parents who were, good parents, right? And especially the good immigrant parents, they expected you to go to school and just sort of, do well in school. But a lot of it was sort of on you to kind of like figure things out, right? Because your parents weren't necessarily as um, familiar with sort of how to navigate the school system. So what would you say, what were some of like the pluses or the pros and cons of like your experience, right? So you kind of
Mm.
had to develop and gain some level of independence and also learn to trust other people to kind of help and assist you along the way. And then what were just some of those challenges in having parents who weren't as well versed in how the system works?
So I'll start with the cons. I'm a positive person, so I like
Hmm.
to end on a positive note.
Okay.
So I'll start with the cons, and the cons were being pushed into a system financially that
Hmm.
was not responsible for me.
Hmm.
As we know, for many of us millennials, the loans were predatory. They were giving
Hmm.
us money that we didn't understand had implications in on the latter ends, right? So I
Hmm. Hmm.
acquired all these student loans, and
Hmm.
I'm paying for school and
Hmm.
housing with
hmm
this money that
hmm
I had to pay back. And I don't quite think that there was a good explanation of how that works,
Got
right?
you,
So I'm
got
like,
you.
oh, I'm getting money from the government.
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah, yeah.
loans.
Right. You don't
Right.
need that back.
Yep. So I think in that regard, that's a major con.
Hmm.
Also, to go back to even before college, I think another con I would say the lack of connection that my parents didn't have with my interests.
Hmm.
I was one of those people that, and still to this day, that am interested in a lot of different things. I like to learn a lot of different things.
Hmm.
And it's funny that I'm working in the digital technology world to some regard, in the beauty space, because I was always a tinkerer when it came to technology, but I was very heavily into music and
hmm
culture and anything relating to entertainment. I
hmm
was all over. I would go to Barnes and Nobles and sit there for hours reading magazines and sometimes buy some magazines and just like be enthralled in that world.
hmm
So, in hindsight, if my parents were paying close attention to who I was as an individual and where my
Right.
interests were,
Right.
I can tell you that I probably wouldn't have majored in what I majored in, and I
Hmm.
probably would have taken a pause to figure out whether a trade made more sense for me or if a art school made more sense for me.
hmm
I was a
hmm
drama kid, I was in theater, and I
hmm
loved that world.
hmm
But on the flip side,
hmm
the conversations around me were about doctors and lawyers, right?
hmm hmm
And police officers and things
hmm
like that. So I felt like because of what I kept hearing, that the things that I was interested in weren't money makers. And
hmm
as we know, the world of entertainment is there's a
hmm
multi-billion dollar,
Right. Yeah.
industry. So I think the con in that was that, as a parent, I think both my mother and father, they had their differences together, in relationship, and they were
hmm
separated. And
hmm
that also added some
Yeah.
elements of me being all over the place.
hmm
My mom was a single mother, tired, working overtime. So I
hmm
think that there was some level of neglect there from a developmental standpoint that I
Gotcha.
think was a con
hmm
for me. So it
hmm
forced me to just kind of make quick decisions so that I can get out of home and figure something out.
Right.
Whereas if there was a little bit more nurturing there from that regard,
hmm
I think it would have been an easier landing for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I love that because a lot of what you're saying ties into the work that I do, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
based around career alignment and career exploration early, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the earlier the better. So I like when you give the examples of going to Barnes and Nobles and spending a lot, like I still do that, right? Spending a lot
Yeah.
of time, you have all these different interests, And then had your parents been, in tune with you, they could have helped to nurture those interests a lot earlier. But, but they
Yep.
were lifing, right? And then I think
Yep.
also the context here, and I'm assuming, right, because my parents, I'm an immigrant, right? And I'm assuming that your parents, came from Panama and they still had family back in Panama, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So it's
Yep.
like, okay, so it's like they're here in America, they have children, they're trying to navigate, just living in America, plus they still got folks back home, so it's like one
Hmm.
foot's here, one foot's back there. So along the way, some stuff is gonna get, fall to the wayside, right? And it's not
Yep.
intentional, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
let me ask you this, with all the different interests that you had, and like you said, you had these interests, but there were sort of like these other things that you were hearing about, like these other professions that were kind of held in higher esteem. And not to say that, your interests were devalued, but you were hearing these other things that may have been internalized by you as maybe this is what I need to do, versus
Yep.
you sort of being, authentic
Yep.
and to the things that you truly were interested in, right?
Yep.
So talk to us about like how you navigated like that time in your life. So as you're, like in your teenage years, you're in high school, and on top of that, you went to high school in New York and in Florida, right?
Yep.
Which I think that's a tough thing to do, right?
Yes.
Especially, like going into high school, the first year of high school, it's called the freshman transition, and that's a huge transitional period, right? And especially for someone like yourself who spoke about having this early growth spurt and you're dealing with just, adolescence, puberty, just coming into your own and
Yeah.
then having to then, do that. Luckily, it wasn't like bi-coastal, right? It was on the same
Yep.
coast, same time
Yes.
zone, but that's still difficult, right? Going
Yep.
from, from New York. So how did you navigate, you know, that part of it? Like the things that you're interested in, the things you're daydreaming about that you're sort of, hoping and aspiring to do, but at the same time, it's not necessarily being supported or cultivated at home.
It's interesting, and I know we want to talk about the pros, right? So I'll get
Hmm.
to that after. But when I think back, if I would have stayed in New York, I think I would have been more authentic in my journey. I would have had more space.
Hmm.
When I lived in New York, I was living with my older sister. I have an older sister that's 15 years older than me, so she was
Hmm.
like a pseudo mom slash big sis.
Hmm.
But I was in ballet. I was
Hmm.
taking the train to school. I had
Hmm.
friends from all over the world.
Right.
And I was able to be more worldly. I was on the step team
Hmm.
and I was doing really well in school. I was
Hmm.
doing really well in school because there was a level of worldliness at Long Island City High School that
Hmm.
I was able to explore and just being
Hmm.
able to like take the train. I was working at Goodwill Industries,
Hmm.
there was some independence there that I was able to exercise and I've made friends very easily. So that's one thing from a social standpoint.
Hmm.
I've
Hmm.
never had a problem in that regard. So I think
Right.
that's what really helped like me transition well from place to
Hmm.
place. So that was fairly easy in New York, right? And I
Hmm.
was able to
Hmm.
navigate that well.
Hmm.
And if I was to think about, how life would have, transcended for me if I would have stayed in New York during that
Hmm.
high school time,
Hmm.
I likely would have either gone to Howard, Hampton, or something
Hmm.
like that. Well, depends, right? Because I don't know that I was explicitly exposed to HBCU culture
Hmm.
on the East Coast
Right.
like I was I mean, in the, Northeast Coast, like
North.
in New
Hmm.
York
Yeah.
versus in Miami. It was very
Hmm.
different, the exposure,
Hmm.
but it still was a very worldly place. So I'm sure I would have stumbled upon it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I think about what that was in Miami, that's where things got tricky for me. And then I kind of tried to descend a little bit
Hmm.
academically because I think there were a lot of things going on at home. My
Hmm.
mother and I were not in a very healthy relationship at that point in my life.
Hmm.
15, I was very independent and defiant as
Hmm.
well, and angry
Hmm.
about a lot of different things that were going on that I didn't understand in my
Right.
family life.
Hmm.
So I was rebelling against that, but then also kind of lost because I was like, I got this great world in New York that I was a
Hmm.
part of, and I loved my big sis. And there was
Hmm.
something there that was different than what I was
Yeah.
experiencing with just it being my mom and I.
Hmm.
So the nice thing about going back to high school in Miami is that there were some people that I already knew because I had lived in Miami already, right, in
Hmm. Hmm.
elementary school. So
Right.
I was familiar in that regard from a social standpoint again.
Hmm. Hmm.
But when it came to establishing myself. and coming into myself, that's where I felt really lost.
Yeah.
Right. And thankfully, because of that best friend that I mentioned,
Hmm.
me connecting with her and having a little bit of an escape in her house with her mom and kind of learning about the
Hmm.
academic possibilities is what started to open that up for me again.
Hmm.
And I want to stress the importance of educators because
Hmm.
there is one particular teacher who's not a black woman. She's a white Jewish lady, but she took
Hmm.
a particular interest in me. It's like she saw something in me.
Hmm.
I had her for summer school when I failed English, and she was
Hmm.
my English summer school teacher.
Hmm.
For some reason, she nudged at me and said,
Yeah.
"You are so much better than what you are presenting,
Hmm.
academically. What's wrong?" And
Yeah.
with her indirect counsel of like
Hmm.
therapy, I was
Hmm.
able to just talk about the things going on at home. I had met some siblings for the first time in high school, which was a lot to bear.
Hmm.
So with so many things going on that I was able to work through. And then there was more room for me to be like, okay, well, what happens after high school?
Right. Right. Yeah.
You know, so that was what that was. Circling back to some of the pros of that navigation is that independence that was forced upon me really
Yeah.
allowed me to thrive and survive,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
figure things out. One thing I
Yeah.
will say is that I always figure things out. I'm a
Yeah.
hustler. I can
Yeah.
work. I've worked every job you can imagine,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm sure a lot of our parents did the same thing,
Yeah.
establishing themselves. So a
For
little
sure.
bit of that was ingrained in me as well as I jumped
Hmm.
from city to city and
Yeah.
even lived in Panama at one point
Yeah.
as well when I was a kid. So I was able to not only connect, but I would always find my way, always
Yeah.
find my way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And shout out to your big sister, man. 'Cause I think that your sister was able to, I'm assuming, but she was able to kind of like hone in on certain things
Yeah, she
that
absolutely
she
was.
that she could do for you that your parents may not have been equipped at the time. You know what I
Yep.
mean? To do. Like so I feel like she definitely stepped in and helped to nurture and cultivate certain interests in you and exposed you, you know what I'm saying? Like in a safe way to a lot of things that ultimately, stuck with you and helped you thrive in
Yep.
whatever direction you ended up going to. So big shout out to your sis. All
I
right, so
agree.
so talk to us now about like going from high school to where, you're in high school, let's say 11th grade, 12th grade, and you're getting ready to like go into the real world, right? So I'm gonna preface
Mhm.
this by saying one of the things that I talk to, parents and students about is the first major decision that you make is after you leave high school, right?
Yeah.
That's the first major decision, like life-changing decision you got to make, right? And usually it's eight options that I bring up, right? So it's either you're going to go to college, you're going to go in the military, you're going to get a trade, you're going to get a job, you're going to start a business, you're going to turn pro, right?
Hmm.
You're going to take a gap year, or you're going to sit at home,
Yep.
right? And then so sitting at home, taking a gap year, turning pro, starting a business are usually not in play. So it's usually go to college, trade, military, get a job.
Yep.
So as you're getting ready to finish out high school, what are you thinking? Like, how are you envisioning, your life is going to turn out? Like, what are the things that are in play for you as you're like a high school junior and senior?
Yeah, so I think when I was in high school, hanging out with my best friend,
Hmm.
her sister, her big sister was going to Florida A&M University.
Hmm.
And I was already in Florida and I really wanted to go to Howard. Like once I
Hmm.
heard about Howard, and I learned that like Felicia Rashad and Puff Daddy, well, he's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
very controversial, but back in
Right.
the
Right.
day,
Hmm.
they were
Yeah.
they were the people, right?
Hmm.
There were so many greats. I think Donny Hathaway and Roberta
Hmm.
Flack and
Hmm.
all of them, like they touched campus. And because I
Yeah.
was so big on music, it's always been an old soul. I
Gotcha.
always made those connections of who was there, right?
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
I wanted to be a part of that. Like all these
Hmm.
greats were there, right?
Hmm.
So Howard was my top choice.
Hmm.
And I didn't get in. Plus, it was too expensive
Yeah.
because my grades were a little choppy.
Yeah.
But before even like applying to college, like I mentioned, my best friend's sister was going to FAMU and we
Hmm.
tagged along to like move her into her dorm. And, I was in a junior and my best friend was a sophomore.
Hmm.
So it was like kind of my turn to start figuring out what was next for me.
Right.
that was the best trip I could have had in order
Mm-hmm.
to expose me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I never did a traditional like college tour or anything like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that was
Mm-hmm.
my first opportunity to see this big old world. Like,
Yes.
wow,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and it was the first time, if I can, just speak about like the racial part of it. It was the first time that I saw so many excellent, smart, people that looked like me in
Mm-hmm.
one sitting,
Yeah.
like in vast majority.
For sure.
The high schools that I went to in both New York and Miami were not like predominantly black or anything like that. I
Mm-hmm.
would say the high school in New York was very culturally mixed. There were people
Mm-hmm.
from all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
but the high school in Miami was very much so black, white, Cuban, and in
Mm-hmm.
between, a
Yeah.
little trickle of in between Venezuelans and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was very much so black, white, Cuban. So
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm Latina, Afro
Mm-hmm.
Latina,
Mm-hmm.
I always resonated with Black culture just because
Mm-hmm.
I present as a
Yeah.
Black woman,
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
So, in that regard,
Yeah.
being on FAMU's campus, and I don't know if you can see, I'm actually repping FAMU.
There you go. Go Rattlers.
I go Rattlers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say that that is what started to pique my interest even more into the world of HBCU because I'm like, oh, there are these professors and this like great history here
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
me to learn more about myself and find my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And that really helped like to see like so my decision in
Mm-hmm. It's,
applying to more colleges
mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
universities that were HBCUs. So
Mm-hmm.
that trip alone, and just to talk about the fun aspects of it, like we
Yeah.
got snuck into a club, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I went to my first concert, and
Right.
all the things that you experience, like
Yeah.
on a college campus for the first time, looking at the dorms, and
Yeah.
it was it wasn't co-ed, it was women
Right.
and boys, and we were in the
Yeah.
middle. All of
Yeah.
that stuff was really cool to be a part of, right?
Nice.
And because I was always culturally tapped in,
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
what called me first.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came to, okay, now how do I get here?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what, started that transition. And then I
Yeah.
started to, when I went back to high school after that trip, I was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to FAMU.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was set.
Nice.
And I'm grateful to have had the opportunity and thankful to my mom as well for
Yeah.
allowing me to go on that trip
Yeah.
because she was not that open, but she was started to let go a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think she started to see like I was hungry for something and trying to
Yeah.
find myself.
Yeah.
So she allowed for me to be explorative in that way. And I'm glad she
Yeah.
did because I was able to, gain some great like experience with that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's a great story of like early exploration and early exposure, right? Even though it might have been like this inadvertent recruitment, like FAMU had no idea that they were going to land you.
Yeah.
Um, but that's really dope. So, okay, so now you see FAMU, you get exposed to that. You're like, okay, this is where I want to be. I'm open to this. So what are you thinking about, like career as you come back for your junior year of high school and then even going into your senior year? Like, what are some of those like career options that you're mulling over and thinking about, hey, this is potentially what I'll major in and this is probably what I want to do for work?
That's where I was lost.
Mm,
There was no clarity for me there.
mm-hmm,
I actually leaned into my mom's profession at the time. My mom
mm-hmm.
was a profession, I mean, an administrative in the correctional system in
Gotcha.
Miami-Dade County.
Mm-hmm,
So she worked for Miami-Dade Stockade in corrections.
mm-hmm,
And for some reason, like going back to the lawyer thing, I
mm-hmm.
thought that I wanted to, work in some level of enforcement, law enforcement, corrections, be an attorney,
Right.
something, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the main exposure that I got was just my mom's profession.
Gotcha,
My dad
gotcha.
was a businessman
Mm-hmm,
and he had several businesses and throughout his lifetime in Panama.
mm-hmm,
But I didn't think I was tapped into that. Like, I
mm-hmm.
was around his business. I was in the DJ booth. I was always
Mm-hmm.
like in the musical aspects of it, but I
Yeah.
didn't resonate with like being a business person.
Gotcha,
But my
gotcha.
mom's profession I was just exposed to.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I guess I'll major in criminal
Yeah.
justice, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like that type of
Right.
thing. But
Yeah.
and then I was a Spanish major as well
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because I'm fluent. I grew up speaking Spanish, but I wanted to feel professionally
Yeah.
inclined to how to connect with the language. So
Gotcha.
that was like a tag along, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I can't say that I ever thought about, well, this is the career that I want. It was
Yeah.
never clear.
No, that's really cool. One of the books that I have behind me, it's this book called The Squiggly Line Career, which is
Hmm.
different from like the ladder, right? So the ladder is just like, okay, you take this step, and you just move up like the corporate ladder. But the
Hmm.
squiggly line career is more so like you go in different, in different directions. It's a squiggly line, right? And
Yep.
then you kind of just figure it out as you go. But a
Yep.
lot of it is really just due to exposure and you kind of testing. It's trial and error, right? It might
Yeah.
take you a little bit longer, but ultimately you'll kind of settle into the thing that that resonates, closest to you, right?
Yep.
So talk to us about how you kind of got to that space, right? Like, how did you sort of experience different things in terms of your career, right? So, like, your major, did you choose to become sort of like a law enforcement type major? Like, or what did you
So
choose?
I did move forward with being a criminal justice pre-law
Criminal
major.
justice, right, right.
Yeah, criminal
Hmm.
justice pre-law major. I always found it to be interesting, but I don't
Hmm.
know that I was passionate about it. Like it was
Gotcha.
cool information to learn,
Yeah,
about the law and,
yeah,
I don't know, injustice and, so
yeah,
I've always been
yeah,
an advocate to some degree, but
yeah.
as far as like passionate and interest,
Hmm.
mm-mm.
Mm.
But I did it just because I didn't know what else to do
Did you view it as like a practical decision, especially based on
at
this is
that
sort of
time.
like right, this is sort
At
of like
that
the
time.
family business based on what your mom's doing, right? You're just
Yeah.
like this is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like I did see that and there were a lot of a lot of black people in law enforcement. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
there were, I mean, in my mom's job, like all of her friends were African American and some
Mm-hmm.
Latino, like,
Yeah.
so it just looked stable, so
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay,
Yeah.
let me just go with a stable thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
passion, absolutely not.
Yeah.
When I was on the Spanish side, though,
Mm-hmm.
that's where I found a little bit of like, oh, this is really interesting because I was learning like, um, I'm sorry, Latin American culture,
Mm-hmm.
Afro-Andean culture,
Mm-hmm.
so Black history in
Mm-hmm.
Spanish
Mm-hmm.
and in the Caribbean in the diaspora,
Mm-hmm.
learning that history and learning Afro-Latin history,
Mm-hmm.
that awakened me a
Got you.
lot. It was an
Mm-hmm.
interest of mine. It felt like a connection to my culture.
Yeah.
And then I was able to find a little bit of myself
Yeah.
in being Panamanian on this Black
Yeah.
campus and making
Yeah.
that tie. But again, I think it was more so like, this is really interesting, but what do I do with that from a professional standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have no clue.
Yeah.
So I decided very early on, like probably mid-year in my college years that I was like, I don't know that law enforcement is what I want to do. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
teach Spanish, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when I went to graduate school, it was again a decision that I wish I never made that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
quickly.
Right.
I probably should have taken a gap year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Because deciding to go to graduate school, I applied, I got into this Latin studies program here in Chicago at Loyola University.
Yeah.
Then I started working at a bank,
Yeah.
just to kind of make ends meet. So I was a teller.
Yeah.
So I was doing that, entering this like kind of business world, and
Yeah.
then, going to this graduate program
Mm-hmm.
and spending more money, with
Mm-hmm.
more loans,
Mm-hmm.
because, oh, you have to keep going to school. You got to get another degree. You got to go to
Right.
graduate school.
Right. Right. Right.
I was so focused on the accolades and just
Yeah.
stacking
The
these
the
degrees,
checklist. The
the
checklist.
checklist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus again, my interest.
Yes.
But I will say that once I entered into the banking world and
Mm-hmm.
started to, that entry level placement of what I was doing, that's where I'm just like, okay, there's something else here that I need to exercise. And then I was also doing like makeup and beauty stuff on the side and started to tap into like the social media world before social media was a thing for real, but like
Mm-hmm.
studying YouTube and editing and things like that very early on in the like, I don't know, late, 20, maybe 2010s,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
2012, around that time.
Right.
And then I realized that I didn't want to teach Spanish. Like I was teaching Spanish 101 as an adjunct, like assistant professor, and it was cool, but if I could be 100% real with you, I was teaching to a lot of privileged kids, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of kids that didn't have any connectivity to who I am as a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like for them, it was just checking a box, like I need this grade, but they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
show up to class and then beg me to, give them good grades. And I'm like, you're not
Right.
even doing the work.
Right,
You know what I'm
right, right,
saying? And I
right.
hated that part of it. If there was something else or a different type of like grouping that I was
Mm.
teaching to, maybe I would have felt differently.
Yeah.
So I finished the degree,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't doing anything with that either,
Yeah,
right? And I
yeah.
was working in banking and then started to kind of maneuver into that
Mm-hmm.
world. And that's where my career started to kind of like, start itself
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yeah, yeah. Now I love that. And here's the thing about your story, right? That's going to resonate with probably 100% of the people who watch this episode. It's very familiar, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of us, because there's no intentional or deliberate career development or
Hmm.
career exploration K through 12. It's just like, all right,
Yeah.
here's all the things you need to do to graduate high school, right? You need
Yep.
100 hours of community service hours. You need this many math credits. You need this many English credits. Okay, good. Take the SATs now, go on. Here's your diploma, right? So a lot of folks kind of go through, the whole education system and they kind of like flounder along the way and just try to figure it out, right? And then the squiggly line. I think for you, it's evident that you were constantly just trying to figure out, okay, what is my thing? What is my thing? Like like you kind of had an inkling early on, and I think you had an inkling all along, but it was still just trying to, how do I bring that into focus? So talk
Yep.
to us about how like a lot of that comes into focus, right? Especially like a lot of the work that you've done recently and a lot of the work that you're doing now. Like how did, like talk to us about the career development piece. Like as you're going through all these iterations, career-wise, like how do you bring it into focus to get to like your sweet spot where you're like, okay, this is I
Yeah.
like how this is.
Well, the interesting part of it is that as I was in my entry level years of my career, I was working in banking,
Mm-hmm.
not crazy about it, but it was safe again,
Mm-hmm.
like looking for
Mm-hmm.
that stability and security. But then after being a teller and working like as a personal banker,
Mm-hmm.
I weaseled my way into private wealth and then weaseled my way into treasury
Mm-hmm.
and technology. And that's where I'm just like, oh, this is kind of fun because then I
Yeah.
started to support Fortune 500 companies in their treasury builds from a
Mm-hmm.
technology standpoint and their payment system standpoint.
Nice.
So that's where like the little bit of the nerd in me where that technology piece was always like in the background even when I was in high school, but I didn't know how to exercise it, and
Mm-hmm.
I started to dabble into that a little bit,
Right, right,
so
right.
I was really good at this one job that I had early in my career at Bank of America. Like I was an implementation specialist, project manager. I've
Mm-hmm.
always been like a very like organized, these are the steps to whatever needs to happen, right? This
Mm-hmm.
project is happening. These are the things that we need to do in order to get from inception to fruition.
Gotcha,
So I was
gotcha.
always like a good planner in that sense. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been
Mm-hmm.
all my life,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm a very like, okay, these are the steps and this is what needs to happen. And I kind of
yeah,
wish that no recognize that early and on I could apply that to how I was planning my
yeah.
life, right?
Right, right,
Like,
right,
right, in
right.
my career. We just didn't have the framework
Yeah.
then. But I started to realize that working that job and doing that project management, program management, that's where things started to connect for me. Like, you're really good at this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was wrestling with this will have nothing to do with what I studied in college. This will have anything to do with anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, but okay, you're doing well with it. Let's roll with it,
Yeah.
right? And that's where I think the career aspect of how kind of like, okay, shifting from the squiggly line that you mentioned to like the
Mm-hmm.
ladder started
Mm-hmm.
to, right size itself, I guess. It started
Yeah.
to go from a all over the place line to like
Yeah.
more of a transcending up.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Um, and like I said, I was always doing beauty stuff on the
Yeah.
side. Like I was a
Yeah.
freelance makeup artist and I was
Mm-hmm.
playing around with certain things and things like that. So it got to a point where the banking industry, it didn't fit my personality.
Mm-hmm.
It was too rigid for me. I was kind of bored with the culture as a whole, but I was always connected to some level of DEI mentorship, stuff like that. And I also wanted to, if I could be frank with you, when I was in relationship prior to my, prior to getting married,
Mm-hmm.
he was in banking and
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, oh, we could be this banking couple,
Yeah.
it's just like
Yeah.
nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So I was kind of following that because it just felt stable.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was neglecting myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
those are things that happen in life where you can easily lose yourself, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's following someone else's plan or
Mm-hmm.
thinking that you got to do this in order to appear a certain way. And I got caught up in that a little bit.
Right.
But once my marriage was over and then I started to enter into my own again, that's when I'm like, all right, I left banking as a whole, which was
Mm-hmm.
a great relief for me. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started entering into technology and software.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still supporting portfolios for some like great companies, beauty companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got laid off in
Mm-hmm.
the tech world during COVID, or like a
Mm-hmm.
little bit after COVID, rather.
Mm-hmm.
And then through good networking, I was able to land myself my current role at Ulta Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, a manager of digital operations
Mm-hmm.
there. And why I, always talk about like being close to beauty or in beauty because it was always a part of my world,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's always been a part of my world. So now I'm in the digital aspect of
Right.
web and app functionalities at a beauty company.
Right.
And then I'm also like in the marketing world. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
touching everything now,
Yeah.
which exercises the interest of many things for me now. So it's
Yeah.
like that's where my sweet spot is
Yeah.
currently.
No, I love that. So you're like a dope case study in a lot of the work that I do, and I'm gonna break this down,
Mm,
and then you can just tell me if I'm off base or not. So let's
okay.
start off. Let's start off with, you said you would spend hours at Barnes and Nobles, right? So when you went to Barnes, what were you looking at? Were you looking at magazines? Were you looking at books? And what were those magazines when you went to Barnes? Or
Oh my
what were those
gosh.
what was the material that you were looking at Barnes?
It was a little bit of everything, honestly.
Mhm.
Mostly I'm a hip hop girl,
Okay.
so fashion, hip hop. So it was the source. It
Mm-hmm.
was Vibe magazine. I think
Mm-hmm.
Vibe is probably my top one.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was also like, Vogue and Harper's Bazaar
Mm-hmm.
so I was in the world of like culture, hip hop, but
Right.
also girly
Right.
girl too.
Right.
Like
Right. Right.
Naomi Campbell, Tyra
Mm-hmm.
Banks, all
Yeah.
of them, all the
Yeah.
fashion models, but
Yeah.
then also like Wu-Tang Clan and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Nas
Yeah.
and, Lost Boys. So I was in both of those worlds. So the
Yeah.
fashion slash hip hop and then
Mm-hmm.
also like the beauty world of
Yeah.
glamour,
Yeah.
that's me. Because
Yeah.
as much as I can be a girly girl, I can be
Yeah.
a tomboy too, and
Right. Right.
I can exist in both places.
Yeah.
So when I would be in Barnes and Nobles, those are the things that I was looking at.
Yeah.
I was always looking at folks in entertainment, their life, and how they
Mm-hmm.
had their squiggly lines coming into
Mm-hmm.
whatever
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
were doing, and
Yeah.
then also from a culture standpoint, I always want to be tapped into what was
Yeah.
current, what was trending,
Yeah.
what was up, what was next.
Yeah.
So in the beauty space, it's amazing because it's the same thing, right? Where it's what's trending, what's
Yeah.
popular, who's
Yeah.
popular, and things like that. So I get to be a part of that world. So Barnes and Nobles, I would say, like, was my babysitter. Like I
Yeah.
loved
Yeah.
being there.
Yeah, man. And that's where you did a
And
lot of your research.
yeah, a lot of my
Yeah.
research, but I wish I knew that that's what I was doing then.
Yeah.
Then I thought it was just a hobby and this was this cool thing that I really liked. I wish I
Sub
could have connected it.
Subconsciously, it is what you were doing,
Okay,
right?
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Subconsciously, I think that's what you were doing because here's the thing, and correct me if I'm wrong. As you're looking at all those magazines, right, and you're looking at the celebrities and the squiggly lines and the different trajectories that those celebrities had, were you thinking as a teenager, before your frontal lobe is fully developed, were you even thinking about the people behind the scenes? Because a lot of times when you look at those magazines, you're seeing the celebrity, right? But you're not seeing the people behind the scenes like yourself, like in the current job that you do, right? Like
Mhm.
you're someone who's kind of behind the scenes in front of all that, in front of like Hollywood, in front of, the entertainment industry. But when
Yeah.
you are a teenager and you're looking, you're not necessarily making that connection because you're seeing just the celebrities, right? And what they do, but you're not
Yep.
seeing like all these people who are behind the scenes who will probably end up having much longer careers than the celebrities themselves, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So, and then subconsciously, you actually gravitated right into that same space that was a very strong interest that you had
Yep.
as a teenager.
Yep. Yep. Totally made that connection there now. You formalized it.
Yeah.
And then even like even though I'm working for a company right
Mhm.
now, I also have my own business and I'm a
Right.
digital strategist,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like you going back to like my father being a businessman,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, like
Yeah.
I had there, like with I want to stress that forever, anybody that's watching this, there are certain things in your job that you're not going to be able to exercise from a passion standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it'll hit certain things, but you'll like to do certain things and you won't like to do certain things in your job. It's
Mm-hmm.
just every job. I don't know
Yeah.
if you feel differently about that, but there's every job, there's pros and cons, right?
Absolutely.
But I started to see that the way that I wanted to support brands, I couldn't really, right now, I'm not in a space to like flex that. So
Mm-hmm.
I started I have my own consulting business in
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I get to look at this brand and they say, okay, I need to show up differently digitally.
Mm-hmm.
How do
Mm-hmm.
I do that? What do
Right.
I need? What
Right.
resources? And because I'm a researcher, I'm like,
Yeah.
I know exactly what needs to happen. And I
Yeah.
connect the team that they need in order to rebrand themselves,
Right.
organize themselves from a digital standpoint, social
Yeah.
media, assets, all the things. So I get to do that, as my business on the side because
Yeah.
again, like I'm not a traditional marketing person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't have this marketing trajectory,
Yeah.
but I've always been tapped into that world, right?
Yeah.
Because of all the research that I was doing with all the magazines. So
Yeah.
I decided to start my business because of that as a
Yeah.
supplemental passion of what
Mm-hmm.
I like to do on the side, right? So
Right.
it's no longer a thing that I just enjoy to like research. It's something that
Yeah.
I am turning into some profit because we need it in this world we live in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
also it sounds like you are recognizing some inefficiencies, right? Or some gaps that these brands may not notice. And you're like, hey, I can not just fill this gap, I can solve it and I can help you solve it,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so is that curing sort of the added interest that you have? Because like you said, like you could have a job, but the job, but they still might be these other things that you're not really doing at your job, these other interests that you have that then, your business can then help to supplement, because this is still something it's like a fire in you, right? And you need to
Hmm.
like, how do I deal with this passion that I have? I have a lot of energy for this thing, but it's not being required in this space that I'm in.
Yeah, it's absolutely feeding that for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of like making extra money, like, for me, there's always been an entrepreneurial spirit in me. Like in
Hmm.
college, I was doing eyebrows, and
Hmm.
things out of my dorm.
Hmm.
I had one of my homegirls across the hall was burning CDs. Like we would
Hmm.
swap. So I was a pseudo business person indirectly.
Hmm.
Then I just
Yeah.
didn't see myself that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But I've always had some type of hustle on the
Yeah.
side. Like when
Yeah.
I was doing freelance makeup artist, and I was doing lashes and all
Yeah.
these things. So when I think about my beauty adjacent world, like there was always some entrepreneurial spirit to that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
And it's like I did a little drawing and put eyebrows for $5 on my door in
Yeah.
in college just to make a little money to get, some extra snacks or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those aspects, I think it's always important to exercise your passions like constantly because you don't want to
Hmm.
lose it. I
Yeah.
don't ever want to be one of those people. It's like, if I would have just tried this out, maybe I would
Yeah.
have turned into blah, blah, blah. Now, whether my business makes me a millionaire or not, I don't know, but at least
Yeah.
I'm doing something with that interest and it is
Absolutely.
garnering some level of income, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And you're enjoying it.
I'm enjoying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Consultants, get hired for major projects, but
Hmm.
in my space, I'm kind of working with the underdog like brands, the smaller brands,
Hmm.
some brands that are not quite there from a capital standpoint, but that still need the support. And
Absolutely.
they're like, listen, I can't afford, to hire
Hmm.
somebody for $100,000 a year, but
Hmm.
from a monthly, retainer, I can pay
Hmm.
this amount, and
Yeah.
please just get us organized. So
Gotcha.
to see those things come to life, I like to make dreams come true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I like to see people, I'm always like, oh, I can help with that. I get
Yeah.
passion over
Yeah.
seeing people, do their thing. And if I can contribute in some way, like even me joining this podcast, I'm like, if it
Hmm.
blows up for you, I would
Yeah.
be happy and just filled with joy to be a part of that. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, Dheena, turn that into something, right?
Yeah.
Because now I've worked with maybe 6 to 7 different brands from a
Hmm.
non-for-profit to a actual like storefront
Hmm.
brand, and I'm seeing them grow, and it's so dope
Hmm.
because I'm a part of that journey,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And so there are a couple of things, two things before we wrap up, right? And
Yeah.
one of the things I want to go back to is I keep thinking, I keep hearing in my head, because one of the assessments I use is a strong interest inventory, right? And I use that with students, with clients, to see where their strong interests are, right? And then there's this thing in the strong interest inventory, it's the general occupational themes, right? It's this thing called the RISEC, right? So it divides us into these six groups, right? These six like occupation groups and these six interest areas that all of us fall into these six. So when I hear you talk about, project management and just almost like having the system and structure and just the order of things, I just keep hearing that you're a C. Like conventional is very high for you because people who are conventional, they need structure, they need order, they need
Yes.
systems. Like things have to be like that, right?
Has
So
to make sense.
it has to make sense, right? Like it can't be clutter, it can't be chaos. Like it has to make sense, right? Even though
Yep.
we're all six of these things, like I think your C is going to be very high. And these things are really important because the earlier that you understand who you are when it comes to like a career, life, and all these things, you can really start to, I guess, build your skills, right? Because once you
Yep.
understand who you are, you kind of know, okay, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to do it, and this is how I want to do it, right?
Yep.
These are
Yep.
things that we don't think about. We just think, okay, well, I need a job. How much does it pay? But then it could be
Right.
in a very toxic environment, and then you're like, I don't like this job anymore. After you get the first check, you're like, this, it doesn't align with my spirit, right?
Right.
So for you, it sounds like you have a very good grasp of who you are in terms of like looking in the mirror, doing a self-assessment, and being like, okay, this is what works for me. This is how I work independently. This is how I work with a group, right? I can kind of take it, depending on the situation, I can do either or, right?
Yep.
Um, so the next step that we go into, we talked about your personal life, like, how you evolved your parents. We talked about professional. So the third P that we usually touch on is the parenting piece, right? So based on your experience, right? And especially the piece where your big sister kind of filled in, stepped in and kind of helped you, navigate a lot of these spaces. The soil is important, right? So what I mean by the soil
Yes.
is the environment, right? And I think
Yep.
for you, going from New York to Florida, I think that helps, right? Because
Yep.
that's still a soil that you can flourish in, you know what I mean? Especially culturally, right? And you still get the north, the northeast, you still get the south, but it's in a soil and in an environment that you can still thrive in because you don't feel ostracized, right? It's still a very
Yes.
comfortable environment where you're like, okay, I don't feel like the outsider. I can kind of blend in and kind of find my way. So
Yep.
taking all that into consideration, how have your experiences impacted you, like the way and how you parent?
Oh, yeah. So I have a 5-year-old son,
Hmm.
and I parent very differently.
Hmm.
So I want to stress here, like I know that I've, probably gave my parents a hard time in
You didn't. You
how,
didn't. You didn't. You
okay.
didn't. You
I was
didn't.
like,
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it,
Don't
it
feel
wasn't
like you
all
did. You
bad.
did. You didn't
Yeah.
throw him under the bus at all. So don't feel bad.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't. You
So,
actually did a really good job. Yeah.
yeah, I think that, when I think about how I parent now, one thing, my son is only 5. I want
Hmm.
him to feel like he's a kid,
Hmm.
right? So the system here in the US is testing, 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 testing. And it's like that stress of testing them early and getting them
Hmm.
into the system
Hmm.
starts really young,
Yeah.
but it's really stressful and there's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure that goes into it.
So
So,
hold. I'm gonna stop you
yeah,
right here, right? I'm gonna
yeah.
pin you, and I don't want to cut your wisdom, right? But I want
No,
to share. There's a book called Aftermath, right? And the book is Aftermath, like math, like mathematics, right? And it's a
okay,
book by what's the guy's name? I think his name is Ted Dinter Smith. Ted Dinter
okay,
Smith is the guy, right? So he did a documentary that I saw. It's an education documentary about the education system in America, right? And one of his famous quotes is this. He says this. He says, "In America, we test um, because he says testing is done in our education system because it's easy to and I'm going to mess up this quote, but it's a powerful quote. He says it's easy to get the answers when you test, right? So because we
okay.
know what we're testing for. But he said the problem is we don't test for the things that are important and the things that are useful. He's saying we just
Yeah.
test because it's easy to administer a test, but the things that are most important to like living and going and thriving in society, those are not the things that we learn, right? And I'm saying that in the context of you saying that you want your son to just be a kid, right? And
Yes.
despite being in a system that is going to overtest them and constantly just, putting this sort of pressure on them.
Yes.
Hmm.
And let me just share a little bit about myself when I
Hmm.
was a child. I was never a good test taker.
Mm-hmm.
Never, never,
Mm-hmm.
never. I high anxiety. I can study something really well, but the minute I'm sitting in front of here, and if it, like I said, we said earlier, has to make sense, I
Mm-hmm.
would clam up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
I know something, but I would second guess myself.
Right.
So it was always a struggle for me. I'm looking at my son, and he's a very active kid. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's very active. He loves music. He is very technologically sound too, though. He loves
Mm-hmm.
STEM, but at the same time, his focus is all over the place. I mean, he's 5.
Mm-hmm.
So no recognizing that, I'm just like, all right, pressure's off.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, I'll let him get tested, but I'm not gonna drill in him. We gotta practice every day.
Yeah.
You can play, you can
Yeah.
watch TV, you can
Yeah.
draw, you can play outside, like focus on that because there's so much room to get him ready. And as far as how I parent, when it comes to getting my son uh prepared for this life, I want him to feel supported and know that
Mm-hmm.
he has room to explore everything that he's interested in, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sports, music, academically, there's room for him to try it all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, with my parents, like it was just go to school, but it was just like, again, that area, those areas where I was like, I was interested in sports and I was interested in so many other things. Like I played
Mm-hmm.
softball for a very short period, but I was so happy doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If those areas, I probably could have got a scholarship. I
Mm-hmm.
don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But those type of things is where I want to focus for my son because I want him to feel as though he had room and space and availability to everything that his little eyes,
Yeah.
touch and want to, see about.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I don't have a whole lot of money rolling in, but
Yeah.
once that happens, I would pay gladly anything that he wants to try, any lesson,
Yeah.
let me try this. Let me see if I
Yeah.
like this. I will let
Yeah.
him do it all and let
Yeah.
him land where he wants to land so that he
Yeah.
feels like I got to try all the things and I really like this.
Yeah.
Right. Also, I grew up in a very strict household.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was very strict, and I think it came from raising out of fear,
Mm-hmm.
trying to protect me and
Yeah.
but my curiosity was always going to surpass
Mm-hmm.
whatever she was trying to like hold me back from. So
Right.
even in the moments where, maybe she didn't have an eye on me, I was
Yeah.
still looking into
Yeah.
that thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even from that standpoint, I try not to be so tight with him and
Mm-hmm.
how I
Mm-hmm.
protect him from certain things in the world
Yeah.
because the curiosity is always going to be there and he's going to find it anyway. So I'd
Yes.
rather give the room for him to come to me and ask questions or, even have a little bit of, worldly exposure to things so that he always feels comfortable because I don't know that I ever felt comfortable coming to my parents and asking
Yeah.
them about random things, whether it was about sexuality or whether it
Yeah.
was about violence or, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it was always this thing that, you just don't talk about.
Yeah.
And I think millennials are very different in that regard, where we're allowing for feelings to be felt
Mm-hmm.
and exploration to be explored and,
Mm-hmm.
access to be granted
Yeah.
and understanding that, we're not protecting them by shielding them and
Yeah.
sheltering them. We're
Yeah.
not, you know.
Now I love that, Dina. And I'll tell you what. I found a quote and I'm gonna read the quote to you, which I think is a dope quote. He says, "We teach what's easy to test, not what's important to learn." Right?
Okay.
That's
Yep.
how he describes the system, right? So going back to what you're saying about your son and how you parent, I think curiosity, like I say this all the time, curiosity is the silver bullet, especially for boys, right? You
Hmm.
know, I have a son and I have a daughter, and curiosity is the silver bullet, right? Like especially if your son is curious about anything, and the fact that you want to expose him and you want to explore with him, especially the things that he's interested in, right? And as
Yep.
long as he's curious, like there's going to be this continual learning that takes place, right? And
Yep.
that's really what it's all about. And then learning, okay, how does he learn best, right? Like
Yep.
based on the things that he learned, how does he learn best? What's the best
Yep.
environment? What's the best soil for us to plant him in, right?
Yep.
So I love that. So as we wrap up, are there any questions that you prepared for that I didn't ask you that you're just
You know
like,
what? Just to expand a little bit, I missed
mhm,
this piece, and I think it's important
tell me.
to note. So my father is in Panama still. Like he
Mm-hmm.
spent majority of his adult life in Panama, and my
Mm-hmm.
mom and I have always been here.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been very intentional about connecting my son to Panama.
Nice.
So this year we'll be spending another month in for this during the summer in Panama. He'll be going to school there. He'll be playing soccer there because he loves
Nice.
soccer right now. So,
Yeah, yeah,
it's something that he does here in the US as well. And I think it was important for me to mention that because for
yeah.
those that have the opportunity to connect back to their origin,
Mm-hmm.
I really, really, advise that you try to.
Yeah, for sure.
While my father is there and I do have some extended family there, I will say that I have gained an appreciation for Panama as an
Mm-hmm.
adult that I
Yeah,
didn't have as a child when I was visiting.
right.
I spent the summers in Panama. I was able to go to school in Panama.
Mm-hmm.
We lived there for about a year and a half or so when I was like in the 10th, not in the 10th grade, but when I was in the fifth grade and I was 10
Mm-hmm.
years old.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm not necessarily going to give my son that exact experience,
Mm-hmm.
having him spend time in the country for a significant amount of time and
Yeah,
also have time with my parents and
yeah.
explore the country in ways that my mom did never has, I
Mm-hmm.
never have,
Yeah,
also allows him to be a worldly child, right?
absolutely. 100%.
And I think it's important, just to always like reach back to your origin.
Yeah,
I think that unfortunately with immigrant parents and immigrant origins, you get lost in the US way of living.
yeah.
And there are some fundamental values that I think my parents instilled in me, even,
Mm-hmm.
with all the US versus immigrant versus whatever.
Yeah,
There are some value systems from a family standpoint, from a reaching back standpoint that were instilled in me. Like there's pride in being from Panama, an
yeah,
immigrant, and all the things. Like
for sure.
I would say I'm Panamanian before I'm American any day. Now I'm
Yeah,
American
yeah.
citizen, right?
Right, right,
But
right, right.
I think it was important for me to share that because, as my son grows into his own, he will always be able to say that my mom made sure that I was connected to Panama in this
Mm-hmm.
way. And
Yeah,
it will make him a better person because now he has an extension of himself that is not
yeah,
just tied to the United States of America. It's tied
yeah.
to a place where we started, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then hopefully I could take him to Africa one day and then
yeah,
he'll understand what that looks like and what
yeah.
that is.
Full
But I think it's
circle.
as oh, if you can and if you can
Mm-hmm.
afford to, and if you can negotiate that in your career in any
Yeah,
way,
yeah,
find your way to be able to spend a significant amount of time in your native
yeah.
country.
Yeah, I love that. And that's essentially you tapping into roots and culture, right? Which
Yeah.
is it's important, right? The roots
Yep.
are vital. So thank you for
Mhm.
making that point, which I think is valid. And I think it's a dope part of the parenting piece, right?
Yes.
To be so intentional and deliberate about making sure that you nurture that side into your child, right?
Absolutely.
And again, it's cool, what you're doing. Your son is 5, right? So a lot of the things
Hmm.
that he's doing are developmentally appropriate, and it's really
Yeah.
important to have, to have parents who understand that, despite what the school system may say, because it's not a one size fit all system. You know what I mean? Like each child's, if you just no matter what the school is, it's going to be very difficult for any one child to fit perfectly into this structure that someone else created. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So kudos
Yeah.
to you for staying on top of that. Dina, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. We've been working on pulling this together, so thank you for
Sure.
taking the time out and sharing the story with us. And thank you guys for joining us on another episode of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.